Okay, we're learning Likkutei Sichot, volume 18, third Sicha on parashah Matot. Divrei Rashi al Vayikra Novach, והשאלות על כך. So, after they conquered most of the east side of the Jordan, right. So there were individuals who went and conquered certain areas. Most of them were from the tribes of Yosef. And one of them is this verse. It says, "V'novach halach v'ilkod et knat v'yikra Novach bishmo." One of these individuals was Novach, and he went and he conquered this place called Knat, and he changed its name to Novach. And Rashi says, "Vayikra Novach umfarish la eino mapik hey." Usually, when you want to say he called it, meaning he gave it a name, unatan la. So you have to have a degesh, a little point in the hey. And here, there's no small point.
What does that mapik do?
It's possessiveness. To it, meaning he gave it the name. Okay, so it has to be possessive. וראיתי ביסודו של רבי משה דורשן לפי שלא נתקיים לשם זה, לפיכך הוא רפא, שמשמע מדרשו כמו לא. So he says, so I learned from Reb Moshe the Darshan, who was one of the early grammarians. I learned from him that the reason there's no mapik here because it didn't stick. This name changed back to Knat, apparently. And so the Medrash here is like saying that Vayikra lo Novach. Instead of saying la, now it ensures that it sounds like to her. So now it sounds like he called it not Novach. Like the name didn't work.
Most of the times they didn't change the names. They just took the towns and they used the same names. There's another Rashi which says
there's a lot of places.
They were Makadosh.
Like Yevus, they changed Yerushalayim. No, a lot of places. No, it's very common to give a new name. It's just the point here is he's saying that this time it didn't stick. Why didn't it stick? Because apparently it fell back into the Amorites' domain. And I have a question. What will Rabbi Moshe say in two similar instances? For one of them is Vayomer la Boaz in Megillat Ruth. Boaz said to her, "V'livnot la bayit." So these are two examples where he says that we have another example like this. There's no mapik in the hay. First of all, you can even think about this. What does it mean? I mean, they're so exact. The Masorah is so exact that it even knows whether there's a mapik, whether there's a dot in the hay or not. In any case, I've seen worse questions. But even this, when you think about this was handed down exactly this way from the time of Ruth. From the time of Schar, this was handed down. There's no point in the hay here. Rashi says that. What do you do there? What's the explanation there? Why is there no point like there should be? No degesh, or mapik as it's called. Yesh le'avin, so says the Rebbe, im ledat Rashi en pirusho shel Rabbi Moshe Darshan matim lepshuto shel Mikra. If Rashi thinks that Rabbi Moshe's, the grammarians, pshat here, his explanation why there's no mapik in the hay, it's not according to the pshat of the mikra. It's not according to the plain meaning. Mishum shetmahani ma'idrosh, because now I have a question. What will we do in two other instances where we have the same situation? Madua mivid l'shato b'chnas. Why does he bring the drasha at all? If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. We don't need it. רש"י היה צריך לומר גם כאן, כפי שנמצא במספר מקומות, פירוש רש"י על התורה, שרש"י מתכותב מילה מסוימת, לא ידעתי. You should have said like he says in other places. I don't know why there's no mapik in the hay. I don't know why the hay is missing it, why there's no possession here. כלומר, אין הוא יודע את הפשט של המילה, למרות שבמדרשי חז"ל יש על כך פירושים והסברים. So he doesn't know the plain meaning, the pshat. Even though drush there is. One of the principles of Rashi is that Rashi does not use a medrash to explain he doesn't use a medrash as a medrash to explain the meaning of a verse. Because of course the verse has drushim, of course it has homiletic interpretations. But that's not Rashi's purpose. Rashi's purpose is to explain the pshat, the plain meaning. So if there's no explanation for the plain meaning, okay, so I don't know what it is. Sometimes I can take from a medrash the plain meaning, even though it's a medrash. But sometimes it sheds light even on the plain meaning. I'm not taking the homiletic interpretation, I'm just taking a piece of it, and that's usually when Rashi says umidrasho. He says, and the medrash says so and so. When he says the medrash says, he's not saying here's the medrash. He's saying from that medrash you can understand the plain meaning. So he didn't have to use Reb Moshe the Darshan's pshat here. וכיוון שפירושי חז"ל אינם בדרך הפשט ממש, אני רואה שמביאם בפירושו בארץ פשוטו שמקרא. So like we said, Rashi doesn't bring a medrash just for the sake of medrash. He brings it when it sheds light on the plain meaning. Secondly, מדוע מציין רש"י תחילת הדוגמה מהפסוק ויאמר לבועז שמגילת רות? לאחר מכן הוא מציין את הפסוק לבנות לבית שבספר זכריה, הרי בספרי התנ"ך מסודרים ספרי הנביאים לפי הכתובים, לפני הכתובים. The order in which he brings the two other instances is also a question. Why does he bring the example from Ruth? And Boaz said to Ruth, said to her. Why does he bring that before the example that he brings from Zechariah? Because in the order of the Tanakh, you would learn Zechariah before you learned Ruth. So the order is also backwards. Third question on Rashi, on what Rashi said. שאלתו של הרמב"ן במדרש רות, יש מדרשים הן על ויאמר לבועז והן על לבנות לבית, וכן מדרש על פסוקינו ויקרא לנובח שלא עמד לאותה השם. המתרצים גם במקומות אלו את חסרון המפיק, מדוע איפה אומר רש"י ותמהני מה ידרוש. The Ramban, who many times is a commentary on Rashi, or at least starts by asking the question on Rashi. Rashi is considered the pashtan, everybody follows. The Ramban is also a pashtan, but he's a pashtan in the world of creation. He's a pashtan with a lot of Kabbalah, with a lot of other things. So he reads Rashi's parish and he says, why did Rashi stop? Why does he say he doesn't know the meaning? There are midrashim that explain exactly why there was no possession in these two other examples also. Why the possessive mapik, this dot that indicates the possessive, is missing. So why didn't Rashi bring them? So it says, דחוק ביותר לומר שרש"י לא ראה את מדרש רות זה, כי תמיהת הרמב"ן הרי הרב אוצר בלום לתורה להלכות ולאגדות והשתמית איתה. So he says, it's very hard to say that Rashi didn't know about this medrash and Ruth with the explanation, because it says Ramban, he knew everything. He saw all the midrashim that were that they knew at that time. So how could he not have brought it? בתמיהה חזקה יותר תמר רמב"ן, the Ramban asks, Nachmanides asks another question, which is even stronger. גם בגמרא במסכת סנהדרין יש דרש על כך שהמילה לה של לבנות לבית הוא אינו מפיקי. נאמר בגמרא שפסוק זה מדובר על חנופה וגסות הרוח שירדו לבבל. ומכך שחסר הדגש בה' לומדים שירידתה לגסות הרוח לבבל לא הייתה באופן של קבע, לבבל נחית, ולאחר מכן השתרו בבי להתם לעילה. So he says, there's another explanation brought in the Gemara itself. The Gemara, of course, Rashi knew. In the Gemara it says, why does it say in Zechariah, why does it say this thing, Livnot Labai, to build her a house, where it's talking about Babylon? So it says the reason there's no Mapik in the hay, it's not building her a house, there's no possessive there, is because it's talking about the descent of negative traits to Babylon, and those traits didn't stick there for long. They went back to their source, which was in Elam. Elam is north of Babylon. Basically, I think it's Persia. It could be it's northern, maybe it's Afghanistan. I'm not sure the geography exactly. So it went back up there. So that's why it says the Gemara that there's no mapik in the hay, because it didn't stick. There was no those negative traits that went down to Babylon. They didn't stay there. They eventually went back to their source. So that's a beautiful example. There's no possession. It didn't stay the way you're describing. אמנם רש"י פירושו לגמרא מסביר שהוכחה שהשתרעו בלהטה מלמד מלבנות לבית אינה נמד מכך שהמילה לה חסר מקפיק בהן, מכך שכתוב לה בלשון יחיד. So Rashi, on his commentary on the Shastra in the Sanhedrin, he says the reason that there's no that we learn that these negative traits did not stick in Babylon, they didn't stay there, is not because there's no mapik in the hay, not because the possessive sign is missing, but rather because it was said in the singular. It said livnot lahem bait, to build them a house instead of her a house. Because it was said in the singular and not in the plural, we understand that they didn't stay. That's how he explains it there. Because the verse before that reads, which I don't remember by heart, it says there were two women, meaning indicating two things that went down to Babylon. And it doesn't seem to build them a house. Okay? To build these two women, meaning these two negative traits. It only says one negative trait, meaning not labite, her house. So that's how Rashi learns it there. וזהו רואה לזה שני דברים שירדו לחנופה וגסות הרוח, וחנופה לבנות לבית, ושם יחיד חנומת שבאו לבנות בית לקבוע בבבל, עדיין נשארה רק חנופה לפודה, וגסות הרוח השתרעו בלהטה. So we learn from this, one of the traits left, and one of them remained. What were these two traits? So one was chanufa, one was flattery. What's your joke about the China man? And Gasut Ruach, and how do we say Gasut Ruach?
Self-importance.
Okay. And it's when a person is coarse, when he acts impolitely, uncivilized. Okay. So both of them went down, but in the end, only the flattery stayed in Babylon, and the coarseness left. In any case, בכל זאת, אין מתאים לשאול בתמיהה ותמהה ממה ידרוש, כי למרות שמסמך שאין רש"י רואה להסביר כך בגמרא, הרי לכן שרב מימושע דרשן אחרי להסביר כך במשמעות דברי הגמרא. Still, Rashi should not have said ותמהה ממה ידרוש on that basis. Just because he has a different explanation for for the fact that it didn't stay. He learns it from the plural, from the singular, not from it not being plural. That doesn't mean that Rav Moshe the Darshan wouldn't learn it that way. So why would Rashi say, and I have a question of why, or what Moshe the Darshan would explain in that pasuk in Zechariah. Of course, it doesn't leave us with an answer about the verse from Ruth. You have to go, no?
No.
Oh, okay. Section 2. המדרשים פירוש רש"י קרובים לפשט. So first of all, ההסבר לכך הוא, so the explanation here is like this. And here he gives this principle that I just explained a few minutes ago. כבר דובר פעמים רבות שגם מדרשי חז"ל מובאים על ידי רש"י פירושו לתורה הם קרובים לפשוטו של מקרא. Rashi does not refrain from bringing a medrash. It doesn't have a problem with the medrash as long as it's close to the plain meaning, meaning it sheds light on the plain meaning. But if it's a medrash which is completely homiletic and has no connection to the pshat, to the plain meaning, it goes off and explains things symbolically, Rashi won't bring that type of medrash. He'll only bring a medrash which, and it's understandable that even a medrash could have a certain understanding in the plain meaning of the text. Even a medrash, even a homiletic, a more interpretation, further removed, could still, within it, be based on a certain reading of the text. And from it, you could glean that reading. You could get that understanding. So, כדברי רש"י, as Rashi writes, אגדה המיישב את דברי המקרא דבר דבור על אופניו. I only bring a medrash which helps explain the plain meaning of the text. But otherwise, I'm not interested in medrash in my commentary on the Torah, because my purpose in the commentary on the Torah is only to explain the pshat, the plain meaning of the words. ואילו את המדרש שאינם מתאימים כלל לדרך הפשט, אין רש"י מביא. כן, like this. מכך מובן מענייננו, so from here we understand, שאם רש"י מביא דברי רבי משה דרשנה ויקרא לנובח, הרי יש להם במקום, הרי יש להם מקום בפשוטו של מקרא. So if he brought Rav Moshe the Darshan, which is that we said he's a grammarian, he's not exactly a darshan. They called him a darshan, but really he was a grammarian. So
How
was
long
really
before Rashi?
years. If I'm not mistaken. Even less. I think he knew him. So maybe he's even contemporary. So if he's bringing Rav Moshe the Darshan, it means that it must bear relevance to the plain meaning of the text. ובדברי רש"י לתמני, מה ידרוש בשתי תיבות? אני לא אומר שאי אפשר כלל למצוא מדרש על שתי מילים האלה. He's not saying that there's no medrash at all to explain these two words. He's saying there's no plain meaning that explains. אלא שאי אפשר במקרים אלו, לפי רש"י, לדרוש את המילה לה ללא מקיף בי, באותו אופן כפי שהיא נדרשת כאן. The plain meaning, the way that Moshe the Darshan explained it, there's no possessiveness here. Means that this did not stick. When you give something a name and it doesn't stick, that's called that the possession was not complete. That explanation, which is very much a plain meaning explanation, a plain meaning of the text explanation, you cannot use that with reference to these two other instances in Zechariah and Ruth. במדרש הכתוב הקרוב לפשוטו של מקרא, כי המדרשים הקיימים הנביאים במדרש המקרא רחוקים לגמרי מדרך הפשט כדלהלן. Because the midrashim that do exist, they are completely homiletic. They're symbolic. They don't deal with the possessiveness itself. Okay. If he's a muvan, although at first it seems like they're the same thing. The thing we just said, that it didn't stick. We're saying there were two negative traits that came down to Babylon. One of them didn't stick. So it seems very similar to saying that a name was given and the name did not hold. What's the big difference? Of course, he hasn't said a word about Ruth. He hasn't said a word about explaining the pasuk in Ruth. Why Boaz said to her doesn't have possession. לפי זה מובן הדיוק בלשונו של רש"י אומר ותמהני מה ידרוש ולא וקשה לי וכדומה כי אין איזה קושי או סתירה בדרשתו של רבי משה הדרשן כאן אלא תמיהה בלבד. איזו דרשה הוא יוכל לומר בשני הפסוקים האחרים על המילה לה. He says the only problem that he has is that he didn't hear an explanation from him. He's saying the principle could still be applied. The possession didn't hold, so that's why there's no point in the hay. But what didn't hold? That's the question. So here we have that a name didn't hold. That I understand. The truth is, it's quite simple because in Zechariah, it's a prophecy. So in prophecy, you have to explain things homiletically. You have to explain this symbolically in some way. Here in the Torah, there's nothing symbolic. There is a Mila in the Megillah of Ruth that it's not symbolic. It was written by Samuel, and like the other books that Samuel wrote, for instance, the First Samuel and parts of Second Samuel, these books that he wrote like Moshe Rabbeinu. They're written in plain language. They're not symbolic, even though Samuel is considered a book of the prophets, and Ruth is a Ktuvim, so it doesn't have to be symbolic. Ktuvim means it's writings. And when you say writings, you mean literally. Literal writings. These are writings. Is Tehillim all literal? It's not. But it wasn't meant to be a prophecy. Meaning you don't have to interpret it symbolically. You can understand the plain meaning of the words. In any case, I'm just adding a little bit more. I hope he gets into it, because that's one of the differences. So he says that there could be an explanation based on Reb Moshe's principle that the possession is missing here, but I haven't heard it. So I have a question. What would he say about this? It's not a kushya. It's not like a hard question. It's an inquiry. What would he say in these two other instances based on his principle that the possession is lacking? וייתכן שבשני המקומות האחרים הדרשה היא שונה, לכן אינה מתאימה לפשוטו של מקרא, כפי שהוסבר בעבר, יש לומר שבספרי הנביאים כתובים, here he says this. יש פסוקים רבים ומילים שצריך לפרשם לא בדרך הפשט, בשונה מחמישה חומשי תורה שבהם צריך לפרש פסוק דווקא לפי פשוטו. So like we said, in the prophets and the writings, you could explain it the way that the Gemara explained it. And that's an okay explanation there because it's symbolic. You don't have to understand the plain meaning of the words because sometimes there is no plain meaning to the words. It's all symbolic. He had something that is a little the opposite from what I said, but with the writings he says it's the same thing. they also might need to be explained entirely symbolically. We said that there's psukim in Tehillim for sure that you can't understand literally. Certainly in Mishlei, there is symbolism. But in the Chumash, in the Pentateuch, in the 5 books of Moses, everything has to have a literal explanation. Somebody would jump up and say, but there are parables in the 5 books, and we just read it in Parashas Balak. There are 4 different mishalim, 4 different parables that Balak said.
Right.
So what do you do about that? So I said, but it says before it starts, Hamashal vayisa mishalo vayomao. That's literal. That was also on Ken Yomor Mushlim that we saw at the end of Pinchas. At the end of Pinchas, we heard about the Moshlim. Who are these Moshlim? They're not Moshlim doesn't mean sovereigns. It doesn't mean rulers. Moshlim means Moshlei Meshalim. Those who made parables. Who are they? Bilam and his father Beor. They were prophets for the nations. Why? Because prophecy by the nations was always symbolic. It was never literal. So when you ask the question, how is Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy different from the prophecy of all the prophets in the world, not just the Jewish prophets, that it's literal? You don't need to explain it symbolically. There's always, like the Rebbe says, you're always looking for a pshat, and that's what Rashi is looking for. So if the Torah tells me, and Bilam said his mashal, so that's literal. Bilam stood up, and he did what Bilam does. What does Bilam do? He says parables. And those are considered prophecies. But he's quoting him verbatim. And he's putting a quote before and the end. And now he ended his parable. Here's the end. And he stopped and finished. So the Torah literally tells me what happened. What can I do that the man talked in parables? Okay. But Moshe Rabbeinu didn't talk in parables. Meaning when he said a mashal, he said a parable, he's not saying it symbolically. It's not that he said it in his head and nobody heard it. No, he said it. So in any case, when it comes to the 5 books of Moses, you have to have a plain meaning. This is one of the great principles, which unbelievably, as far as I know, was never stated before the Rebbe. That in Rashi has to go according to the plain meaning. He's searching for the plain meaning because that is how you have to understand it. At the base level, the 5 books of Moses. You have to understand. So somebody would come and say, but Moses says this exactly the same thing, with a slight variation as what the Hammurabi Code says. So first of all, we have a question, who came first? We don't really know. It's too close. It's too close to call. We don't know. It's too close. We don't know for sure about the Hammurabi. We think we know. But it could be, it's 200 years off. Secondly, there's no problem that Moshe Rabbeinu knew the Hammurabi Code. So what? It's another one of the sources of his knowledge. But what he said, when he said the words that he said, which may sound the same, he said it as a prophecy. He didn't say it as a legal...
Something that he made up.
It wasn't a legal discussion. He wasn't engaged in a legal discussion and saying, this is a leftover from my legal discussion. He was receiving this as a prophecy. What throws you off? The fact that when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks, he speaks literally. And when he says, when an ox gores a person, so what if the Hammurabi code has the same thing? It also has when an ox gores a person. That was common, because oxes, that's what they do. They'll do what they do. So when Moshe Rabbeinu says that, it's a prophecy. It's not meaning it's a word of God. The Hammurabi code is a great work. Why? Because it was one of the first times, probably the first time, that human beings wrote a legal code. And they didn't use prophecy or anything else. They just used their brains. It's just a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a first. It's not the same thing as the Torah. Okay? But in any case, this throws people off and was not fully understood, or at least not fully elaborated until the Rebbe came and elaborated it to everyone. that Rashi always wants to find the plain meaning, the pshat, because that is the principle of the Torah, and that's what sets it apart from every other prophecy in the world. That every other prophecy is symbolic. Okay? So now we have to
No, we have to finish. We have to finish this, then we go.
Rashi Tama Ma'idrosh. So Rashi says, what will he homiletically say? Ma'idrosh רבי משה דרשן שתי הפעמים האחרות שבהם מופיעה מילה לה. האם יהיו אלו מדרשים הקרובים לפשוטו של מקרא? ואז מצאתי לו חבר למדרש על המילה לה בפסוקנו? או שהוא ידרוש את המדרשים בין במדרש ובגמרא אשר אינם בדרך הפשט, ואז לא מצאתי לו חבר. What will Moshe the Darshan say? Will he didn't teach it, so Rashi doesn't know. It says, will he give a medrash like what he gave here, which is close to the plain meaning, that it simply lost its name, and that's why there's no possessive sign in the name? Or will it be like the explanations given in the Talmud for the instance from Zechariah, where it's completely a symbolic explanation? Because if it's like a symbolic explanation, so that doesn't help me, says Rashi. I don't have another example where the possession is missing and the meaning is like what you said here, that the name didn't stick. But if Moshe the Darshan could come up with something else, not written in the Talmud, and that would be closer to the plain meaning, so we would have another example where the possessive sign missing means that something didn't stick, something didn't stay. Okay? So that's where
To be continued.
Continue this tomorrow. Do you follow all the details?
Very
Which details are the possessive part? What's the hardest part? No, but something is possessive.
No,
You know
I
that.
can understand that. Yeah, but I'm just saying the whole eating of Digduk is, me and Digduk get on like peaches and creosote.
And?
Creosote.
Yeah.
Peaches and creosote.
What's a creosote?
Creosote is the stuff that you put on wooden fences to stop the worms coming to attack them.
Okay.
You just say peaches and cream.
Yeah.
Peaches and creosote.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Join after this. Check out.